Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I think it's an interesting job with some very interesting names. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about West Virginia, which after several years did fire Neil Brown, the head coach that has been there since, I believe, 2019. Let me pull it up real quick here. He had been at West Virginia since 2019, went 6-6 this year, finished 37-35 overall. If you remember, we actually opened last season. We said Neil Brown was actually on a hotter seat than Jimbo Fisher. He was on the hottest seat coming into last year. He goes 9-4. But after a 6-6 season this year, ties for 8th in the Big 12. And oh, by the way, down the stretch, West Virginia was not good, losing 2 of its final 3 games, Baylor at home, and then also at Texas Tech to close the regular season. Neil Brown is fired. Now, listen, normally I wouldn't spend a ton of time on West Virginia. It's no disrespect, great fan base, great state. I've spent time there, beautiful people, beautiful state, whatever. But why I want to talk just for a minute about this job opening, there's actually some very interesting names that could open up as potential candidates for West Virginia with ties to West Virginia, either the state or the school. First of all, I can tell you that for 2 years, the rumor has been that Rich Rodriguez is trying to get back to West Virginia as the head coach, okay? And listen, this is one, I got a little bit of a soft spot for West Virginia and for Rich Rod. I've told you all a million times, I went to UConn. I referenced, by the way, throughout the season, been following Brian Kelly's career since he was at Cincinnati in the Big East football with UConn. And also, I was at UConn when West Virginia had those Steve Slayton, Pat White teams at West Virginia under Rich Rodriguez. Listen, there was a 4-team playoff. If there was a 12-team playoff in 2007, I truly believe they would have won the national championship that year with Pat White, with Steve Slayton. They lose on the final day of the regular season to Pitt in the backyard brawl when that was still played as a conference game. And so you look at Rich Rod, he's kind of had a very interesting run since his time at West Virginia. Remember, this was a guy, he went to Michigan. We know it doesn't go well. He goes to Arizona. You can sit there and say that he wasn't very good at Arizona. Listen, he was at Arizona for 6 years. He had 5 winning seasons. He won 10 games one year, went to a Fiesta Bowl, played for a Pac-12 title, and won 8 games 3 times as head coach at Arizona, okay? So he's been good. And oh, by the way, remember, he's at Jacksonville State now, a small school that is in Conference USA. We actually had Rich Rod on the podcast about a year ago. And Jacksonville State last year went 9-4, made the school's first ever bowl game. And this year, they're 8-4 and playing for the Conference USA title right now. They have the number 3 rush offense in the country. They move the ball. Rich Rod still knows how to coach ball. And listen, I mean, listen, it goes without saying, I think he'd take it. I think it'd be fun for nostalgia. I don't think it's the craziest thing that West Virginia should or would call Rich Rod. So Rich Rod has to be at the top of the list. The other big name with very obvious West Virginia ties, you're going to laugh, but he does have West Virginia ties. It is none other than Mr. Buyout himself, Jimbo Fisher. So Jimbo Fisher is from West Virginia. And let me say this, okay? I'm just going to say something, and I don't know how controversial it's going to be. I don't feel like Jimbo Fisher would necessarily be the worst coach for West Virginia. Now, listen, do I think he's going to ever win another national championship? No. Do I think that thing was a little bit fluky? ACC was down. You had so much more talent than everybody else. Yeah. But here's a couple facts on Jimbo Fisher, okay? As recently as 2021, 3 seasons ago, the guy won 8 games in the SEC. So for like all the fact, like everyone's saying he's like totally incompetent. I don't believe he's totally incompetent. I don't think he's elite, especially when you put him in a conference with Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and all the good coaches in the SEC. Lane Kiffin kind of had his number the last few years. But he won 8 games 3 years ago in the SEC. You mean to tell me he can't win at West Virginia? It's no disrespect to West Virginia, but the Big 12 is an easier spot than the SEC is beyond that, criticize Jimbo for whatever. He's been able to recruit everywhere that he's gone. Number one classes at Florida State, obviously a number one class at Texas A&M. And so, one, Texas A&M didn't make like this amazing improvement without him this year. They went 8-4 instead of 7-5. So it's not he's so terrible. They won one more game without him against a much easier schedule. So I don't buy that he's terrible. He's going to be able to recruit. He's going to be able to raise funds. And I don't think raising funds is necessarily as important if we get this house settlement where the schools can pay players directly. But you're still going to need a collective for something. You're still going to need the collective to help broker like you're still going to need an NIL presence from the boosters, and that's what Jimbo Fisher does the best. And so I know it sounds crazy, and I know everyone's going to make fun, and he's the worst coach that's ever walked the face of the earth. I don't think Jimbo Fisher would be terrible at West Virginia if they make the call. Now, I'd call Rich Rod first. By the way, a couple other names that are worth noting with West Virginia. Barry Odom at UNLV. He obviously has ties to kind of, not really that part of the country, but more of the Midwest and eastern part of the country. Was at Missouri. Listen, remember, Barry Odom wasn't terrible at Missouri. Like it's easy to kind of oversell, what he did as the head coach of Missouri. But remember, this was a guy that in his 4 years at Missouri, 3 winning seasons, including an 8-5 year, he's been really good at UNLV. They're playing for a conference championship this weekend. They're 10-2 right now. And I've been told he's looking for a way out. I think it's kind of interesting because he's been kind of targeted as the potential next head coach at Arkansas. I can tell you for a fact, I think he thought that Sam Pittman was getting fired last year and that he was going to get the Arkansas job. That obviously did not happen. It does not change the fact that, in my opinion, he thought he was getting that job. And so because of it, I believe that he is looking for another head coaching job. And I think West Virginia would make sense for him. Obviously, the other big name, John Sumrall, of course, at Tulane. He is kind of the belle of the ball right now. Everybody seems to want him. Has won 9 games as a first-year head coach at Tulane. Tulane is playing for an AAC title this weekend. Now, what's interesting about him, by the way, back-to-back 11 and 12 win seasons at Troy. What's interesting about John Sumrall, pretty straightforward, is that what's pretty straightforward with John Sumrall is I think he's going to have a lot of really good opportunities. Remember, this is the guy that some believe is the favorite for UNC. Obviously, I don't think Kentucky's getting rid of Mark Stoops because Mark Stoops said, I'm going to be back next year. But that is the guy that Kentucky fans have wanted for a long time. So I just bring it up because I think West Virginia is going to have better options than maybe a lot of people realize. By the way, there's, I think, even a report out that Andy Kolenicki, who's, of course, the offensive coordinator at Penn State, who has had a ton of success with that Penn State offense this year, that he could be a legitimate candidate there. So I just bring it up to say that I think West Virginia is actually going to have some pretty good options. And I'll tell you this, I think there's going to be some big names attached to that job too that are certainly very interesting.